Set up the camera on a Thursday morning, and I almost talked myself out of it 3 times before I finally left the house. It was a small thing, a little black device no bigger than a smoke detector, the kind you order online for $60 and forget about until you actually need it. I'd had it sitting in my Amazon cart for 2 weeks. I kept adding it, then removing it, then adding it again. Because buying it meant I believed something, and I wasn't ready to believe it yet. But on that Thursday, I bought it. I set it up, and I drove to work anyway, hands tight on the steering wheel, telling myself I was being paranoid, that I was one of those guys, the jealous, insecure kind who'd rather blow up a marriage than admit he trusted his wife. I almost believed that. Almost. My name isn't important. What's important is that I'm 58 years old. I taught high school history for 26 years in a mid-sized town in Ohio, and I thought I knew what my life looked like. I had a house I'd paid off, a pension coming, a golden retriever named Biscuit who slept at the foot of the bed, and I had my wife, Lorraine, who I'd been married to for 31 years. 31 years! That's longer than most of my students had been alive. We met in our late 20s at a church potluck of all places. She brought a green bean casserole. I brought store-bought cookies and lied and said I made them. She called me out on it immediately. Something about the Kroger logo still on the tin, and I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my own embarrassment. We were engaged 8 months later. I want you to understand that this isn't a story about a bad marriage. That would almost be easier to explain. This is a story about a marriage that looked fine from the outside and felt fine from the inside until the day it didn't. The first thing I noticed was the phone. Lorraine had always been the kind of person who left her phone on the kitchen counter face up. Nothing to hide. She'd answer texts in front of me, read me funny things her sister sent, leave the thing charging on the counter overnight. That was just who she was. Sometime around February, about 8 months before that Thursday, she started keeping it face down, started taking it to the bathroom. I noticed, but I filed it away, the way you file away things you don't want to think about. I told myself she'd probably just gotten some spam and was embarrassed by it, or maybe she was planning a surprise for my birthday in April. My birthday came and went. There was no surprise. Just a card from Walmart and a dinner at Applebee's because it was my favorite and she'd always rolled her eyes at it fondly, the way she did. The second thing I noticed was my son-in-law, Marcus. Wait, I can't call him that anymore, my daughter's ex-husband. His name was Scott. He and my daughter, Faye, had been married for 4 years. They had a little girl together, my granddaughter Poppy, who was 3 years old and had the kind of laugh that makes you believe things are going to be okay. Scott was, I thought, a decent guy, a little too confident, the kind of man who always had an opinion about everything and stated it like it was already the consensus. But he worked in HVAC, made good money, seemed to love Faye, doted on Poppy. I had no reason not to like him. And I didn't dislike him, not really. I just never fully relaxed around him. Instinct, maybe. The kind of thing you can't explain to your wife without sounding irrational. Faye and Scott lived about 20 minutes from us. Scott would come by sometimes on his lunch break when he had a job nearby. We lived in a quiet neighborhood, and parking was free, and Lorraine always had food. That seemed normal, generous even. Lorraine liked feeding people. She'd always had an open-door policy with family, but sometime around March, I started noticing his truck in the driveway more. Not just lunch visits, afternoon visits. Sometimes I'd come home from school at 3:30, and his truck would be pulling out just as I was pulling in. Once he waved at me like nothing in the world was unusual about it. I waved back. What else was I going to do? I mentioned it to Lorraine once, casual as I could manage. She said Faye had been having a hard time with Poppy's sleep regression and had asked Scott to do some extra childcare pickups, and sometimes he stopped by our place first to grab something from the garage. We kept extra tools in there. This was true. Scott did borrow tools occasionally. I nodded, filed it away again. Here's what nobody tells you about suspicion. It doesn't announce itself all at once. It seeps in. It's like water getting into a basement. You don't notice the first couple of drops, and then one day you look down and you're standing in 2 inches of it, and you can't figure out when it got this bad. By April, I wasn't sleeping well. By May, I'd lost about 8 pounds without trying. My doctor asked me at my annual physical if I was under stress. I said work was a lot. He nodded and printed me a pamphlet about cortisol. I drove home with it still folded in my jacket pocket and sat in the driveway for 10 minutes before going inside. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself this for 4 months, and then I saw the text. I wasn't snooping. I want to be clear about that. Not because it matters legally, but because it mattered to me. I was not the kind of husband who went through his wife's phone. I'd never done it in 31 years, but she'd left it on the counter face up, the first time in months, and it buzzed, and I was standing right there, and I looked down out of pure reflex. The preview said, "Can't stop thinking about yesterday." The name above it was Scott. I put the phone back down, face up, exactly how it had been. I walked to the back porch and stood there for a long time looking at the yard. Biscuit came and sat next to me. I put my hand on his head and didn't say anything. That night I ordered the camera. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I'm also not ashamed of it. Because I needed to know, not because I wanted to blow up anyone's life, but because I had been living for 4 months in a fog of dread and half-certainty, and I needed to either confirm it or be wrong. I needed solid ground under my feet, one way or the other. The camera went in the living room, pointed at the couch tucked behind a row of books on the built-in shelf. It recorded to a cloud app on my phone. I set it to motion detection, and then I drove to school on a Thursday morning in October and taught 2 periods of the Civil War and 1 period of Cold War foreign policy, and ate a sandwich at my desk and tried not to think about it. The notification came at 12:47 p.m. Motion detected. I didn't open the app. Not right there in the teacher's lounge with Karen from English sitting 3 feet away. I put my phone in my pocket and finished my lunch and sat through a department meeting and drove home with the phone sitting in the cup holder like a bomb I hadn't yet decided to detonate. I sat in a parking lot off Route 9 and opened the app. I watched 4 minutes and 30 seconds of footage. That was enough. I don't need to describe what I saw in detail. I think you already know. What I'll tell you is that it was my living room, my couch, my house, the house I'd paid off, the house I'd painted the trim on every 5 years, the house where Faye had grown up doing homework at the kitchen table, and the 2 people on that couch were my wife and my daughter's husband. I watched it once. Then I backed it up to the cloud. Then I texted my brother-in-law, who's a retired Akron police officer and knows a thing or two about evidence, and I said, "I need to talk to you tonight." Not on the phone. He came over that evening. I showed him everything, the footage, the text preview I'd seen, months of gut feelings now confirmed. He didn't say much. He just nodded slowly and then looked at me the way men look at each other when words aren't really adequate. Then he said, "You need a lawyer before you do anything else. Don't confront anyone yet." I didn't confront anyone. Not that night. But I did one more thing because I am 58 years old and spent 26 years in front of teenagers, and I know that a single piece of evidence only tells part of the story and can be challenged. I ordered one more camera. And over the next 2 weeks, I backed up every piece of footage, saved every timestamp, documented everything in a folder my brother-in-law helped me organize. I found an attorney, a woman named Sandra Howell, who specialized in divorce cases in our county, and who looked at my evidence folder the way a surgeon looks at a clean incision. Approving, efficient, unsentimental. She said, "This is going to be straightforward." I said, "Nothing about this feels straightforward." She almost smiled. "I mean legally. Now, here's where I need to tell you about Faye. My daughter was 33 years old. She was a school counselor, which, given everything, I have some thoughts about. And she'd always been the kind of person who led with her heart. Passionate, loyal. The kind of woman who cried at commercials and also at injustice, and couldn't always tell the difference in the moment. I loved this about her. I also knew it made her easy to manage if someone wanted to. I made a decision, after talking to Sandra, that I was not going to tell Faye what I knew. Not yet. Not until I was legally protected. Not until I was legally protected. Not until the divorce filing was in motion. Sandra agreed this was the right move. The last thing I needed was Faye confronting Lorraine or Scott before the paperwork was filed, giving either of them time to move money or assets. We had a joint savings account with a little over $84,000 in it. We had the house, which had been appraised at $310,000 the year before. We had my pension, my 401k, Lorraine's part-time income from her bookkeeping work. Ohio is an equitable distribution state, meaning the court divides assets fairly, not necessarily equally. Sandra thought I was positioned well. I filed in November. Lorraine was served on a Wednesday morning while I was at school. She called me 11 times between 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. I didn't pick up. At lunch, I texted her, "I'll be home at 4. We can talk then." I don't know what I expected. Denial, maybe. Tears, certainly. What I got was something I wasn't prepared for. She sat at the kitchen table with her hands folded like she was waiting for a bus, and she looked at me and said, "I know this looks bad." I sat down across from her. "It is bad. It's not what you think it is." I slid my phone across the table with the footage already loaded. She didn't watch it all the way through. She looked away after about 30 seconds, and her jaw did something complicated, and she said, "How long have you had this?" "Long enough." She started to cry then. Real tears. The kind you can't manufacture. And I want to be honest with you, it hurt. 31 years of marriage means that even when you're sitting across from proof of betrayal, even when the anger is sitting right there in your chest, the person across from you is still the person you've known for most of your adult life. The grief of that is real. It doesn't cancel the betrayal, but it's real. What came next was not what I expected. 2 days after I served Lorraine, Faye called me. Her voice was strange, flat and careful. The way you talk when you're repeating something someone told you to say. She said, "Dad, Scott told me what happened." I said, "What did Scott tell you?" And she said he'd been acting erratically for months, that you came over to their house last week and said things that didn't make sense, that Mom is scared. I sat very still. "I've been acting erratically." He said he's worried you're having some kind of episode. He thinks you might be developing early onset dementia. I want you to sit with that for a second. My son-in-law, the man I watched on camera in my own living room with my wife, was telling my daughter that I was losing my mind, that my filing for divorce was a symptom of mental instability, that I needed to be evaluated. I said, "Faye, I need you to listen to me." She said, "Dad, I just want you to get checked out." Scott said, "Faye." I stopped. I took a breath. I have evidence, not a feeling, not a memory. I have footage. I have timestamps. I have an attorney. Whatever Scott told you, I need you to look at the actual evidence before you make any decisions. Silence on the line. Then she said, "I can't right now," and she hung up. That was the call that broke something in me. Not Lorraine's crying, not the footage I'd sat with for weeks. Faye's voice on the phone, flat and managed and not quite her own. That was the thing that kept me awake for the next week and a half. I knew what Scott was doing. He was a man watching his life collapse around him and looking for any lever he could pull. If I was mentally compromised, the divorce filing could be challenged. If I was deemed unstable, Lorraine's attorney might have grounds to request a psychological evaluation, to delay proceedings, to muddy the waters long enough to shift the asset conversation. And if my own daughter was raising doubts about my mental state, that was leverage. I'm a history teacher. I understand how power works. I understand that when someone is cornered, they attack the narrator. What Scott didn't know was that I'd had a full physical in September, 6 weeks before I filed, and that my doctor had noted no cognitive concerns whatsoever. What he didn't know was that my brother-in-law had been with me through every decision of the past 2 months and could testify to my clarity and consistency. What he didn't know was that Sandra had already anticipated this tactic. She'd seen it before and had quietly arranged for a voluntary neuropsychological evaluation that I completed in early November, which came back with a clean bill of cognitive health. I had the paperwork before he finished his sentence. The divorce proceedings moved forward. Lorraine's attorney tried twice to raise the mental competency question. Sandra submitted the evaluation results both times. The judge moved on without comment. Scott's marriage to Faye was, by this point, in freefall. When Faye finally saw the footage, I shared it with her directly through Sandra, so it was delivered in a controlled and documented way. She went very quiet for a long time. She called me 3 days later. She didn't say much at first. She said, "I'm sorry I didn't call you back." I said, "I know." I believed him. "I know." He kept saying you were confused, that you were imagining things. He was so calm about it. He just kept saying it over and over, and eventually it started to sound like the truth. I told her what I knew about that technique. Told her it had a name, gaslighting, and that it worked best on people who trusted the person doing it. I told her that being fooled by someone you love doesn't make you foolish. It makes you human. She cried for a while. I let her. "What do I do now, Dad?" "Whatever you need to do," I said. "And whatever you need to do," I said. "And whatever you decide, Poppy and I are going to be fine. So are you." She filed for divorce from Scott about 6 weeks after that conversation. The financial piece, I'll be honest, was complicated. Ohio courts divided our marital assets. I kept the house. Lorraine agreed to a buyout of her share, which she financed through her family, and I retained the majority of my pension, which courts treated as primarily mine given the tenure. The 401k was split. The joint savings was divided. It wasn't the clean outcome I'd hoped for, but Sandra had prepared me for reality, and the reality was better than I'd feared. Lorraine moved in with her sister down in Columbus. I don't know where Scott is living now. I don't particularly care. The HVAC business he'd been building, which Scott had partly funded using a loan co-signed by a family friend, not by me, thankfully, apparently struggled once the personal fallout hit. I heard this through a mutual acquaintance, and I did not feel the satisfaction I thought I would. Mostly, I felt tired. Biscuit is still sleeping at the foot of the bed. The bedroom feels bigger now, which I didn't expect. Some mornings I wake up at 5 a.m. and lie there in the quiet and think about how strange it is to grieve something that was also hurting you. 31 years leaves a shape in your life, even when the person is gone. You keep reaching for habits that aren't there anymore. You set 2 mugs out of the cabinet before remembering. Faye and Poppy come over on Sunday afternoons now. We eat lunch, usually something simple, sandwiches, soup if it's cold, and Poppy has decided that Biscuit belongs to her specifically, which Biscuit does not seem to mind. Faye is in counseling. She's doing the work. She looks tired sometimes, the way you look when you're rebuilding something from scratch, and you know it's necessary, but it's also just a lot. Last Sunday, she helped me repaint the living room. The couch is gone. I donated it to a church thrift store in September, approximately 2 days after I watched that footage. The new couch is gray, which is not a color I would have chosen for myself, but Faye picked it, and she was right. It looks better. While we were painting, she said, "You never freaked out. Through all of it. How?" I thought about that for a moment. I said I freaked out plenty, just not out loud. She laughed at that, the real laugh, the one I'd been waiting to hear again since that flat phone call in November. And I thought about how the worst thing that had ever happened to me had also, in some way, cleared out a space. Not because betrayal is a gift. It isn't. Not because I'm grateful for the pain. I'm not. But because sometimes you spend 30 years building a version of your life that isn't quite true, and the day it falls apart is also the first day you have a chance to build something honest. I retired in June, 6 months early, which I could afford with the pension in place. I've been substitute teaching 1 or 2 days a week because I like the kids more than I expected to miss them, and it keeps my mind sharp. I've been going on walks with Biscuit in the morning. I'm reading again, actual books, the kind I always meant to get to and kept postponing. I'm not dating. I'm not in a hurry. I'm 58 years old and I have, according to my doctor, a statistically good chance of living another 30 years, which is a long time to figure things out. The camera is still in the box on the shelf in my study. I don't know why I kept it. I keep meaning to sell it. Maybe I will. Maybe I'm keeping it because it's proof that I trusted my instincts. Finally, after 4 months of talking myself out of them, that when I finally stopped giving excuses more weight than evidence, I found my way through. Faye asked me once if I wished I'd found out sooner. I told her I wished the whole thing had never happened, but if it was going to happen, then no. I don't wish I'd found out sooner. I found out at exactly the moment I was finally ready to do something about it. Some of you watching this have something sitting in your stomach right now. Not a certainty, just a weight. Something you keep filing away. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just telling you that the truth doesn't get lighter the longer you carry it alone. I'm telling you that finding out, even when it breaks things, can also, eventually, be the beginning of standing on solid ground again. That's what it was for me. I've thought a lot about the word patience since all of this happened. Not the passive kind. Not the kind where you just sit still and wait and hope things resolve themselves. I mean the other kind. The kind that requires you to stay quiet when every instinct is telling you to explode. The kind that asks you to keep showing up, keep thinking clearly, keep documenting, keep breathing, even when the people you love most are being used against you. That's what this whole experience taught me, more than anything else. That there's a real difference between reacting and responding. Reacting is what Scott wanted me to do. He wanted me angry, irrational, easy to dismiss. If I had walked through that door swinging accusations without evidence, I would have been exactly the unstable man he was already describing to my daughter. I would have handed him the story he needed. Instead, I went quiet. I went deliberate. And that quietness, as uncomfortable as it was to live inside, is what protected me. I'm not saying I was noble about it. Some nights I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes before I could go inside and act normal. I burned through a lot of long walks with Biscuit. I called my brother-in-law at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday and just said, "I don't know how much longer I can do this." And he said, "A little longer," and somehow that was enough. There's nothing heroic about that. It's just what doing the hard thing actually looks like. Not dramatic, mostly just exhausting. What I keep coming back to when I think about Faye is this. The people who hurt us most are rarely strangers. Scott didn't have power over my daughter because she was weak. He had power over her because she trusted him, because she had built a life with him, shared a child with him. And when the person you've built everything with tells you something, your first instinct is to believe them. That's not stupidity. That's love working against itself. And when someone deliberately exploits that, uses your love as a tool to isolate you from the people who could actually help you, that's a particular kind of cruelty that deserves to be named clearly. The choices Scott and Lorraine made had a logic to them, and that logic eventually ran out of road. You can manage a deception for a while. You can layer excuse over excuse. You can work the edges of someone's trust. You can count on the people around you not wanting to believe the worst. But evidence doesn't negotiate. Timestamps don't gaslight. And the moment the truth is documented, actually documented, not just felt, the architecture of the lie starts coming apart no matter how confidently it was built. I think about the version of me that never bought that camera, that kept filing it away, that chose the comfort of not knowing over the disruption of finding out. That man would still be losing weight without understanding why. Still lying awake at 5 a.m. with something unnamed sitting on his chest. Still giving his trust to people who had long since stopped deserving it. Knowing cost me something. It cost me a marriage, a version of my family, a future I thought I had mapped out. But it gave me back the one thing I hadn't realized I'd quietly surrendered over those long months of not letting myself see clearly. It gave me back my own judgment. That's worth something. At 58, that turns out to be worth quite a lot.